for House Bill 1, for instance, it will give you the draft bill. You will be able to see the exact text. Off on the right side of that is different forms of the bill. And I would urge most people, when they pull that up, to get the PDF that says introduced. That has line spacing, line numbers, and page numbers on it, where a regular one does not. And it's a lot easier to follow across what they've done to a bill if you've got the line spacing and the page numbers. Up near the top of that is a tab that will show amendments. Now, typically they don't put amendments up until they're going to be considered. So when the bill is first introduced, it's assigned to a standing committee. Let's say it's a bill that's going to raise taxes in the House. Any bill raising taxes has to start in the House of Representatives, not the Senate. But for instance, if there's a bill that's going to raise sales tax, it's going to be assigned to the Revenue Committee. That committee will work the bill. There's 9 members on each committee in the House, 5 members on each committee in the Senate. The committees mirror each other. There's a Revenue Committee, corporations, whatever, in each body. But anyway, if the bill goes to committee, it can't be heard for more. It has to be in the committee 12 hours before they can post a hearing. So if it gets introduced on a Monday, it's possible that it can be up for hearing on Tuesday. So if you're following a bill, you need to keep on your toes because they move fast. Now, any amendments or any action taken on that bill in that committee is not going to show on the website until it is reported out of the committee back to the House of Origin. For instance, the House of Representatives in this case. When it is read in on the House floor, that's when the amendments will show up and the action, what they've done to it, will show up. So there's a little lag time there that you have to kind of be patient with. After that, that bill is going to be in the Committee of the Whole general file in the House floor. Then the next day it will be on second reading. The following day, unless they have difficulties, if they run into something they can't work out right away and they need to lay it back a day, they can. But typically, once it goes to general file, it will be on second reading and third reading and final passage the next day. So it's quite conceivable that a bill that is introduced Monday can be through the body by that Friday. So you have to be aware of that. Over the years, I've had several bills get away from me, and you lose track of them, and the first thing you know, they're over in the other body already. One other thing I will mention, and this sometimes throws people for a loop too. If they amend the bill a lot in the initial body, what they'll do is when it goes across to the other body, and let's say it's a House bill to begin with, when it goes across to the Senate, they will call it an engrossed bill. What that means is the amendments that were put on in the first body, in this case the House, will be written into the bill and not just be added to it. So you will have a bill that is completely different in its form than what you saw originally. It will include all the amendments or rewrites that are done to it in that first body. Then that bill goes through the exact same process it did in the first House. It goes to standing committee. It goes through the hearings in committee. It's reported out of committee. It goes through general file, second and third reading. And then if there's no changes in that version from what the initial body passed, it will go to the president of the Senate or the House, depending on which body is acting on it as the second House, for their approval. And then it's ready to go to the governor for law. Now, if there are differences between the two versions, the one passed in the House and the one passed in the Senate, then it will have to be reconciled in conference committee. Typically, a conference committee is made up of 3 House members and 3 Senate members. They get together and they decide if they can accept the amendments or if they need to change amendments. The first time they meet as a conference committee, they can't rewrite amendments. They can just take amendments off or replace or leave them on. Now, if they can't agree, the first committee, Then it typically will go to what they call a free committee. A free committee has the ability to rewrite amendments or add language neither body had seen before and work for a compromise to get it through that way. That's the one part of the process that is really tricky, is the conference committee. I've had bills over the years get changed completely from what they started out at in conference committee, and you hardly knew what you were looking at compared to what you started with. So I would caution you, if you've got a bill that you're following very closely and it goes to conference committee, watch it very, very closely. Okay, now a little bit of history on what's going on this session. We've never had a session like this in the past. This year is our typical 40-day session. Well, with the COVID situation and the pandemic, it's not typical by any means. They met in January and assigned a number of bills to standing committees. Those committees met when the legislature was not officially in session and worked those bills ready to go to the general file list in both the House and the Senate. So that 1 week of virtual meetings they had when they were in session, starting January 29th and running through the first week of February, approximately 70 bills passed in that time frame and have gone forward for signature in the governor. And I believe at last count, there's about 50 that became law. Now, several of the other ones, of additional 20, had more work needed on them, so they held them back. They've worked them this last week. I've had, on average, about 4 committee meetings a day since Monday. And those bills are going to be ready to go on to the general file list when they start Monday, March 1st. Now, this session in March is going to be a 5-week session. It's going to adjourn the end of the first week in April. And in that session, the second week of March will be budget work. They were going to top issues, that's health and human services and the education situation. Those two are going to take some time. At last check today, when I was listening to the Appropriations Committee in the House, what it looks like they're going to have is there's going to be about $300 million shortfall in education. Not so much this year because they can cover it with savings money. But the next biennium, we will be looking at roughly a $300 million shortfall if they don't do anything different. The last I heard today, $1 million out of this debate in the Appropriations Committee and the House Education Committee. So that nothing is set yet for what they're going to do, but that's basically what's going on. Now, I'm going to mention a couple of the bills that we're looking at for the coalition here, and these are the meatpacking bills. They're sitting out kind of in la-la land right now because there's no money available for them, and they're going to probably have to wait until the next tranche of COVID funds come before they fund any work on those bills. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad and let him explain what's in those bills.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Make sure I'm not muted here. I don't think I am. No, I'm not. Yeah, so thank you. So first of all, let me say that part of my job is to spend a lot of groups in these committees and subcommittees, particularly ag, whether it's the House or Senate or the Joint Ag Committee, education, and appropriations, which is the people who decide the money. And what I do is I see opportunities for our group, our coalition, and for others, and also opportunistically for the college. I'm at Central Wyoming College, I think there are opportunities. And so that's kind of the lens that I take when I look at these, and I try to say, oh, if they change this a little bit, that'll be good for us or the college. And naturally, that's what you're supposed to do with these bills. You critique them, right? But I think we have a really big opportunity right now because the care situations. We have care, and there was, I have figures written down for even the meat program. I have all sorts of details of how many millions and millions of dollars got injected into different type of things. And you had to scramble. All the money had to be spent by, they said December 30th. I always wondered why it wasn't December 31st, but I think they had to close books on the 30th. And so you have this mad rush. And I think there's going to be, once again, some people call it CARES Act 2, but it's, I guess technically it's CRRSA, CRRSAA, but it's easier to say the CARES Act 2. There's going to be injection once again, and statewide it could easily be, a couple $1 billion and millions of dollars that could go into two areas at least that would be very important for the food sector. One is where in supply chain in food. And so, that's perfect. This is where, if we look at these three bills I'll go over shortly, and also other opportunities that aren't going to be at the legislature. Our college got about half of its money by jumping straight to the governor. A portion of the money, the CARES Act, and two of the bills, these meat bills, were designed to be presented at the next. It was supposed to be, they were hoping for another special session last August, never happened. And there was this dance between the legislature and the governor of who gets to spend the money. Well, technically, it went to the governor's office, but we know the way our constitutional government is set up is who's supposed to levy taxes and spend money. It's the legislature, not the governor. So there was this dance between the executive and the legislature. So long story short, a lot of money that we're going to get again here is going to go through the legislature and like these three bills, but there's going to, once again, it's going to be sloppy. And we have to prepare to know what we but this, if you're on our website, and if it qualified under fixing the supply system or people need healthy food, we got approved. And then that request went to the Attorney General, and they kind of said, well, does that pass muster? Does that really fit the Treasury Department definition of what is eligible for the CARES Act? And this time there's going to be a lot more eligibility. And we have to be ready. Lots of money by running, and money for a greenhouse, money for a mobile slaughter unit, money for this. And it's going to be that way. And we have to be prepared to make these arguments. Luckily, if the process is the same as last time, the governor's website form for COVID request was really simple. It's the easiest grant application you'll ever see. It's probably the length of like 5 tweets. And you just have to make it strong. And so I think we need to all really, really keep in mind that you need to be creating your Christmas list of things that, the coalition members that we really need. And our school is pretty good at it. We have a grants office, and they're pretty good at getting money. And this is where, and luckily, they're all foodies, and we're willing to play together. But so keep that in mind in the back of your mind as I kind of go forward. So the two big things I think is with these two bills, there's two bills that were very much, as of Scott said, kind of related to COVID. So there was a House Bill 51, which was meat processing. And then there's House Bill 54, kissing cousin. It's the other part of these two gears, which is, and it was called Wyoming Meat Packing Initiative. So one is meat processing programs. The other is meat processing initiative. The meat processing programs, keep in mind, was written to be passed in August. And all the dates on there say all the money will be spent by December 30th, 2020. And go, wait a second, this legislative session, we're already in 2021. And people said, well, they should have gotten, and changed the numbers, because these were designed to catch and funnel CARES money. And so it's relevant, and they're being really kind of held back, and they need to change the dates on them. And they wish they had more clarity, because if they knew exactly what this CARISA or this CARES Act 2 would, they could change the language to get ready to catch that money. So what you need to do, the legislature would like to be able to spend the money and not just give it to the governor again. And so they're saying, this is what we want. We created this meat packing initiative the Wyoming Department of Ag, $20 million. And that's kind of like a swag number, like we don't know how much we're going to get, but at least going to be 20 million. I would say that it may be more as we got. So, and the other bill is there's no money that was attached to it. Also, well, if we're going to spend this money, we have to establish a system, this Wyoming Meat Packing Initiative. And it basically on it. So they took those two bills and they threw them into this session saying, the new money, we might get it. Let's position ourselves. Maybe we'll get a session and be able to legislatively decide where the money goes rather than the governor deciding. And so what happened last time is the governor said, Wyoming Business Council, you need to spend this. And people were hearing that we need to help the meat processing industry. And so the governor created the Meat Processing Expansion Grant Program through the Wyoming Business Council. And through that program, they ended up allocating only, frankly, $4.8 million. Remember, there was about $2 billion to spend, right? There was a whole lot. And the fact that at the end of the day, only $4.8 million was awarded to 29 applicants, I'm greedier at that. I think the food movement can handle a lot more than just 4.8 million when there's literally billions to go around. And so what the meat processing program basically said is, like I said, the legislature would like to get their hands on about $20 million to help with grants and loans to expand meat processing. And the bill speaks to kind of mid-size operations that would help meat locally and out of state. And one of the pieces of my advice was, do we have to say mid-size? I'm of the ilk that I think that to strengthen our communities, you want them to say help small and mid-size. And I don't think big size pencils out, and I don't think it's good for the long-term reasons that I think the country has experienced with the meat processing. At a certain point, it's detrimental to our community. So that's House Bill 51. We want $20 million to help through the Wyoming Business Council that would go to people who apply for, a lot of it was just grant money for expansion. And so it wasn't failed. It was never passed or voted upon because, like I said, we didn't have that August session. But this legislation sent a big message to the governor of kind of what he'd be okay to spend it on. You could argue that it wasn't his money to spend because legislatures should spend money, but it was given to him. He asked the legislators to look at it. They didn't meet. Why? There was an election coming, a primary election. They had other things to worry about. But basically, the information in this bill was given to the Wyoming Business Council. So in a way, even though the bill was never passed, the spirit of it and the dollar figures largely happened anyhow. The Wyoming Business Council did get the money. They did have a process that is spoken to in this bill about who is eligible to get the money for expansion. And so this is where these bills matter, because if we establish, even if they don't pass or even really see much of the light of day, and once again, the governor gets the money, he says, well, I should work with the legislature, but there's no time to have a special session. They basically indicated kind of how they want to spend the money. And so once again, I think the two bills together basically say, we want at least 20 million bucks. We'll want more money to expand local meat processing. And the House Bill 54 basically says it should be the Wyoming Business Council. So when I look at these bills, I'm looking at it for opportunities to bring in voice that'll get to the governor's office, or the protocols will be set to respect what the legislature wants. And so you look at these bills and you say, noticeably, what's missing on the meat processing program? Well, one, and I love the meats thing, our college is hitting it hard, but you say, well, how come there's no veggies in there, right? You just wonder, saying, wouldn't that be great if there's going to be twice as much money? Is it smart for us to confine what we can spend this federal money on? And remember, we couldn't spend it all, and we didn't spend it all. You're given too little time, and there's too narrow of a qualification. So this is where we could say, would it hurt or kill you to add a portion, another 5 million, to look at other broken parts of the food supply chain, not just meat? Going, oh, what would that look like? Oh, money for refrigeration and transportation. And also, I'm speaking Leanne and Jesse's language, right? In terms of things that we can do. And then one thing I did when I was at the Ag Committee on these bills, these two bills, I said, there's a mention of workforce training, but there's no money for it. How do you expect to get people trained? And so you say, can we inject workforce training so that when the money lands next time, we can say, you know what? They want money for training. Let's in. And then they say, you know what? They had a big discussion about, well, how do we prevent people out of state benefiting from this initiative? In other words, we don't want, someone said, our meat processors to take meats from other states, Colorado, process it and send it back. We're trying to push our local ag economy. And I said, well, marketing could be it. There's no money in here for marketing. So I said, how about $150,000? And I had this, I wasn't even prepared for this, right? And I just said, we need money for marketing. Because from the coalition's discussions, we know we do. We need, these online platforms and advertising. We know we need videography for what the local farmer is doing and rancher is doing. And so I suggested $150,000 for videography. And a couple of days later, called Leanne Miller and said, I just asked for money. And I hear that you're doing videography. And this is where I think we are with this whole movement, is people, what do we need? We look at these bills and say, this is great, but can we add something to meat? Can we have marketing money? Can we have refrigeration money? Can there be transportation money? Because we know building this whole system out requires, it's a system. It's this whole socioeconomic, ecological system. And just getting money to people to expand their meat processing is just a tiny piece in that.
Brad, if I could add at the moment,
Sure.
House Appropriations today took up Senate File 50, which is Business Relief Programs Agriculture. Now, in that bill was the funding mechanism for both the other two bills you mentioned. And I have to hand it to the Ag Committee. They got a jump on this. They developed this bill in January. And they got ahead of a lot of the other agencies that now have similar bills out there. But the point that came across from Chairman Nichols of the House Appropriations Committee is the best information that they have been able to glean from the governor's office and from our congressional people in DC is they most likely won't know what the money coming in the next CARES Act is until after they adjourn in April. And they fully expect to come back in a special session with a very slim agenda, basically taking the funding that is provided in the new CARES Act 2 and doling that out and deciding which agencies and which programs will be funded to try to go forward with that money. So that dovetails so perfectly into what you brought up. We need to, as a group, the coalition I'm speaking of, we need to figure out where our priorities are. And when that time comes, we need to jump, because you're absolutely right. The wheel that squeaks loudest gets the grease, or in this case, CARES money. And that's how we can go forward.
Absolutely right. I do think we need to write our Christmas list or your Hanukkah list or whatever your analogy would be. But we need, as you said, in better terms, we need to figure out what our priorities and what we want. And I know we're in the position you say, well, we need more time to to distill the plans. And I go, yeah, but a pandemic is once in a lifetime, hopefully. And these opportunities seem to come about every 20 years where, there's this gigantic stimulus package and you just have to say the best of your knowledge. And we're scrambling a little bit at the college because we might say, I think we need some freezer units. I don't know where we're going to put one in Riverton, but we need one there. And you scramble and you get somebody to kind of commit, and it just becomes this real big scramble. And is it the most effective way to do things? Nope, but it's the opportunity. So then there's House Bill 52, and House Bill 52 is all about matching dollars so that K-12 could buy local meat. And it's House Bill 52, Wyoming School Protein Enhancement Project. And it's interesting because it basically asks that K-12, the school districts, not colleges. And one thing I'm pushing in the community college, we have a lobbyist pushing for is having the colleges included in this. But currently, the way it's written and passed was basically the K-12 system, that the K-12 system statewide could have matching dollars up to $25,000 so that schools could buy or accept donation meat and have the processing of it paid for. And so as a fiscal note, they're not really asking for 25,000 because there's a lot of discussion on this. And Scott, I may be wrong, but I look at that, it implies that they're getting $25,000. But what it says is that if the K-12 system, the whole states under the superintendent, can find the money, if money is available, contingent upon funding, the verbiage is, they can match up to $25,000. It would be a lot nicer if they said, and there's this fiscal note, and the request is for $25,000. Their request is such that they get requesting really the permission to spend out of their budget $25,000 for this dollar for dollar matching money for basically taking local meats, and it could be was all red meats, including bison. And I'm trying to think, I think it did it have poultry in there? I don't recall. I could scan down quickly.
Brad, I don't think it had poultry. I think it had pork. And I think it had beef and it had bison, if I remember right.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny because I've read these over 4 times today, but I still get scatterbrained on it. But this is one of those cases where obviously we're in support of this. It's getting the nose under the tent. And we do this in the college sector. You kind of get the approval, and then 2 or 3 years in a row, you're asked for some money and you get a little bit. In an ideal world, back in the day in Wyoming, you get a big old endowment to support it, when the minerals industry was booming. But now I still think it's important to get the nose under the tent on these things and then expand it beyond just meat. Then you start to, what about healthy food? What about from greenhouses? I say, absolutely. this is where I think you support this, and then you try to tag on, and some of, the sponsors of this are obviously thinking meat, meat, meat. But I think there's an opportunity at least the discussion level when you attend these meetings to say, hey, what about other types of food? That's the same kind of broken supply chain thing, that it's healthy food. It's helping local producers. And I think these ag groups would nod in your head and say, you're right, you're right. And they'll probably think maybe next year we'll write it such that you get more things than just meat into it. And I think the big part is just showing up, being nice, being polite. And then in a year or so, sometimes you get what you want. But I do think that's a very nice bill because it's talking about getting healthy food, local meat to schools, helping basically, match for match, buy local. I mean, the message sent by this bill is so positive that it opens this whole door for all sorts of things in the food chain.
I think you're absolutely correct on this. And I think this is a really important bill for us to keep an eye on. You've given us a great overview of all of these bills. I think there's one more. Scott, were you going to talk a little bit about the FFA revision? I think there was one other bill. Let's talk about that, and then we'll be able to start answering some of the questions after we get that overview.
Earlier, people that had registered for this Zoom call mentioned that they were very interested in any changes to the Food Freedom Act. There's one very small change going on to the Food Freedom Act. It is being sponsored by Representative Duncan from Goshen County, and all it does is add eggs into the bill. So far, the bill has been silent on eggs. This adds eggs. It also mentions the USDA exemption for eggs, and those two would be included in the bill. And it's a simple one-page bill, so it shouldn't take long, but they've got about 20 co-sponsors, so it looks real good. And I think that's the only one I'll list individually, Leanne, at this time.
Oh, okay. That
There's
sounds
a number
great.
of bills out there that could affect us, but I really don't see anything coming down the pike that we need to be real concerned with the first 4 or 5 days.
That sounds great. I appreciate that. Brad, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, not really. I'm glad that we have plenty of time to try to answer questions that I can imagine that could be all over the place by looking at the chat room. But yeah, I think we're just ready to field questions or talk strategy or whatever people want.
Well, I think, does that sound good? As far as we have plenty of time. We've got about 20 minutes for questions. I will tell you just a quick note. So the Wyoming Food Coalition did meet today, and we have a subgroup looking at funding, and we are going to get together and make that wish list so that we can be ready when it comes to fruition. And I think some of the big things that we could help out with are more mobile units and regional refrigeration and cold storage transportation. Those are excellent ideas. With that being said, our question is, are there schools here in Wyoming to teach a person the art of butchering, and which schools offer that program, Brad Tyndall?
Oh man, was that teed up sweetly. Well, there's obviously UW has an amazing facility, and they offer a good program there, and such that even their I understand he was the lead faculty is now owns 307 Meats, and just shows you what all the good ideas was in his head. I know that there's a little bit of animal science at Northwest, and we've taught animal science, and you'll see that in a couple other colleges, I think at Casper, and you'll see that in Sheridan. And I'm sure, I know Eastern has an ag program as well. But I think where we are in terms of where you actually can learn what we call craft meat, because at the time has come that it's not just, butchering in a big faculty, but some of you have heard me said this, but our program, which is starting, is craft meat, because just as coffee used to be crappy, now it's gourmet. Beer used to be crappy. I'm sorry, folks who like Coors, and I'm from Colorado, it's bee water, but now it's craft. And the time for meats and food has come as well. So our program we're seeing is really as a craft meats program. And keep on saying we're going to launch it any day now, but we stumbled a lot. And just so y'all know that, but we're trying to get it launched. We bought a mobile slaughter and a mobile pack and wrap, and we bought it from somebody who was a USD inspector in another state. But I've learned the hard way that going from one state to another, even on what USDA standards are, varies. It sounds like that's impossible. No, because there's human interpretation and there's state level flexibility up to the discretion of the people involved locally or regionally. And so we're still struggling to get both those units, the slaughter unit and the cut and wrap, approved. And so we've hired a faculty person, Amanda Winchester, and we're excited about that. But it's hard. I don't know, I keep on saying next month, but we're pushing to really finally maybe have things set up ready to go in the summer. And this is in partnership with Sheridan and at Eastern in Torrington. We got a grant, Wyoming Works grant, and the mobile units allow us to kind of bring these things in the field. And one person did ask, what's the benefit of mobile? Well, mobile works in the academic world really well, right? Because you can take it all across the state and show people how things work. In terms of a production facility, you only can do a couple head a day. So it's not like it makes a whole lot of sense in those terms, but they're not expensive either, a couple $100,000. And so I think they have their role to play in kind of seeding or changing the paradigm where you're bringing this to people and they're getting their head around it. We're almost kind of like the wine sniffers, like get people excited, show them, slaughter a couple animals, show somebody local. And I also see that the college could play a role as kind of a backstop whenever the production thing is broken down. Catholic College has had to send, 50 sheep to Colorado, and they say, no more doing that anymore. We can do that with mobile slaughter if the local other folks can't do it. So yeah, so we're going to try to hit training hard. I've asked for amendment for House Bill 51 and 54. I said we asked for about $400,000 in scholarship dollars. So we're getting the bucket out, getting ready so we can do a lot of training of people.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. A couple of other questions, and I think maybe Scott, you can help with this, and Brad, you could jump in as well. I think there's some confusion about the only amendment that I saw to HB 118, which is the Food Freedom Act amendments, was to add eggs that people can sell eggs direct to the consumer. That was the really only change that's being made to that. Is that correct? Do I understand that correctly?
That's the way I read it.
Okay.
One other bill I noticed that's out there, Leanne, or a question that was out there. Currently, there is no bill proposing to put the sales tax back on food. That bill was brought up in the fall before the Revenue Committee, and it was defeated. There is no current bill pre-filed to do that. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be a sales tax bill available that could possibly be amended to include that. But as it stands right now, there is no bill before the legislature that would reinstate the sales tax on food.
And that was good work, Christine, on that, and others who helped on that. Because if you show up in a state with 500,000 people, we kind of know each other. When you show up and speak, it makes a difference. It really does.
So, and I'm just going to go back real quick to the food freedom because there's some, what makes this different than the food safety rule? How was it different than what's currently allowed? As I was understanding, eggs were considered a potentially hazardous, and so, but now you are able to sell them to your direct-to-consumer as long as you inform your end consumer that they are uninspected and ungraded. Is that correct?
That is the way I understand it. It has added them to the list of products available to be sold under the Food Freedom Act.
Exactly. So I hope that answered the questions that were relative to that part. And
Leanne, do
then-
you mind if I jump in on
Nope.
HB 118 real quick? I mean, just to clarify the question, because I'm Penny and I have been talking about this with some other producers. I think maybe more the question is the way we sell eggs right now isn't even under Food Freedom Act, and it allows us to sell them directly to consumers as long as they're not marked as graded. So I guess it's sort of a two-part question, really, is one, what change, if any, is there being done by bringing it on that I would love, or that we as producers would love to get the panelists' take on, is this new amendment also references some federal regulation. It adds eggs to the list, but it says that the eggs have to be in compliance with a certain federal regulation. And just a quick read through on that. And I'm not super familiar with this stuff, so I might be reading it wrong, but it looks like that federal regulation says that the eggs cannot be sold through a third-party business. Basically, if they're sold off-site of production, that the producer has to own that business, which is actually more restrictive than some of what we can do right now. So those are kind of the two parts of the question. One, what is the actual change if we can sell them direct to consumers already? And two, are we interpreting that federal regulation?
My take on what you're asking, Adam, is the exemption that's in place federally allows you to sell so many eggs. And I think as long as you stay within that exemption, you're going to be okay. Now, I haven't researched the entire CFR on that issue completely, but when we were doing our Wyoming WyoFresh, our Triple Crown Commodities online market that Leroy can help me with there, we had people that were selling eggs and they were all under the federal exemption. So I think that's the key to it.
And also they were
I'll
all,
research it
yeah,
further.
and they were all ungraded, and it had to be specified they were ungraded the date they were collected. So for a long time, they've been able to sell eggs directly to the customer. They just couldn't sell it. If they were selling them to a grocery store, they had to be inspected, candled, and all of that. But they could sell direct for 12 years, 10 years. A lot of eggs are one of our big sales with WyoFresh and Triple Crown. So I'm not sure what the change they made, Scott, really is.
it's like one paragraph. Literally, this bill is one paragraph. And I can tell you exactly what it says. It says that the transaction under this act shall be directly between the seller and the informed end consumer, except as otherwise provided by this act. The seller, and that's in red, so that's a change. The seller of eggs or a homemade food product consisting of non-potentially hazardous food may be the producer of the item, an agent of the producer, or a third-party vendor, including a retail shop or grocery store, as long as the sale is made in compliance with this act. The seller of the homemade food item consisting of potentially hazardous food, except eggs, shall be the producer of the item. And that's the change. So
it's probably the third party thing that they changed.
The way I'm reading that, what they're doing is they're allowing people to purchase eggs and use them in a product that they're making and selling under the Wyoming Food Freedom Act. That's why they've got the exemption for eggs in there. So if you're selling eggs, the way I read that, you should be allowed to purchase your neighbor's eggs and use those in a product and then sell that under the Food Freedom Act. I think that's what they're clearing up, because I really remember some problems with the discussion in that in session 2 years ago when we amended the Food Freedom Act at that time.
And I think you are correct. We do have a question from Penny. Vance, do you want to unmute?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I have looked at this a lot, the Powder River Basin Resource Council Ag Group, And we do have some concerns about it. We're just not exactly sure why we need it. Now, I hadn't really thought about it quite in Scott's terms. So I'm not sure about that, but I think regulations that guide whether you can use eggs and cook something and then resell it are kind of a separate ball of wax. Like you probably couldn't sell a custard with the same kind of caution that you could just sell something that had an egg baked into it. And I would have to look at that part. But our concern is that there are regulations in Wyoming that cover the sale of eggs. As I recall in former conversations, and I could be corrected on this, is that the Food Freedom Act was always cautioned not to include something that was already taken care of. That all it does is just make things more confusing. And because eggs are covered under other regulations, let that be as it is, unless there's a driving need. And maybe there is. Maybe I'm overlooking something. I certainly could be. But I do think it would just be a really good idea for us to just take a hard look at that bill and make sure, like what Adam says, that we're not creating something for ourselves that we don't want to create, especially having a federal statute stated in the bill. If it's still there, I assume it is. I haven't looked at it. It hasn't changed. It's like, why do we want to start stating federal statutes in our Food Freedom Act? I think that's really probably not a good idea. So I would just suggest that we, in whatever fashion, we really take a hard look at this. And of course, we don't have a lot of time. So, if nothing else, maybe we could get the bill tabled so there's time to really look at it. Yeah.
I'm not seeing any other questions. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to bring up? We've got about 7 minutes to be respectful of everyone's time.
I have a quick question. So with the eggs, if somebody sells the eggs, do they have to do that candling process to them and any of that? No. Okay.
And I don't know if this is relevant or not. I know that there was a time when a producer was selling eggs to a food truck who was using them to make scrambled eggs and breakfast burritos. And the health department shut them down and said they could not buy farm fresh eggs. They had to buy them from graded and in a grocery store. So I don't know if this is going to help that per se, or and alleviate that, or if it's not. So I'm not sure. Penny, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, the regulations that we have in place already say that you can sell them to a grocery store, that you cannot sell them at a food preparation place, a restaurant or something like that. So it's already established that we can't do that. And I don't know if we can just arbitrarily change that with the Food Freedom Act. That would be a kind of questionable thing we'd have to look at.
The rule against third-party sellers would come into play on that, Penny, if I understand it correctly, because you're selling an ingredient that's going to be used in a product that is going to be the end product being sold.
Correct.
And that would be true of a lot of food in the Food Freedom Act, though. I mean, we can't decide what somebody else is going to do with it once they've sold it. Adam can't sell this, lettuce and decide what the next person is going to do with it. So I would think eggs would be, but the producer of the egg cannot sell it to a restaurant. He can sell it to the grocery store, oddly enough, but not a restaurant.
Right. Correct.
And our Food Freedom Act, part of the whole, beauty of it is that, have figured out ways that you can get that third party involved by making sure that the third party is an extension of the producer. That in fact, so that's, that's something that we always have kind of with all of the products that are covered in the Food Freedom Act.
Can the restaurant owner buy the eggs then from the grocery store?
They
As
have
far
to-
as
they have to be inspected to sell through
that's right.
grocery stores.
Right.
because we did have the Department of Ag people do a canneling session here in Wheaton about 5 years ago. So they went through all the rules and regs, and you know, you could sell through a grocery store, but they can't use that product to make bread or whatever. I mean, whatever, because it's not inspected. It has to be labeled as ungraded, and yeah.
Okay.
So that rule's been out there a long time.
Correct. Yeah, it's different. It's strange. It's anyway. So do we have any other questions for either Brad or Scott? I think we've, you know, kind of talked about, I think we've answered all the egg questions, and which is an unusual little one paragraph bill. We've got about 3 minutes left. I did want to say a little bit, we didn't really give good introduction to Scott and Brad, who are, you know, we just kind of went in and got everything started. I did want to say that Scott Zimmerman, he is a part of our Wyoming Food Coalition, but he also is a major force in the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union and has been a government specialist for like 30 years. So he's really been a part of this. And Brad, who is with Central Wyoming College and has been also a part of the ag committees and et cetera. So both of these gentlemen have done a lot with the ag departments, with you know, government affairs and et cetera. And if they would like to say a little bit about what they're doing or what you know, I would welcome them to both say that.
Leanne, I'll take just a minute. The other side of my hat that I wear, a dual hat for Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, is Rocky Mountain Farmers Union has the cooperative development grant from USDA to do cooperative work developing co-ops in Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. So I spend considerable time when I'm not at the legislature or when they're not in session and working on interim issues, working on cooperative issues. So anyone that has any issues dealing with possibly forming a producer co-op, much like Triple Crown, that was the online farmers market we had in Southeast Wyoming. That's the other area that I've got expertise in, and am more than willing to hear anybody's ideas and help them work through those to hopefully get a co-op started.
Perfect, thank you. How about you, Brad?
Well, you opened the door, so a few things we're working on. I'll try to do it in a minute. But there's so many aspects to ag, right? And as a college, we have to kind of think strategically of what niche we can fill. And so the niche that we're aiming for is, we're trying to find the right word for it, but we're calling it heritage ag. We think it's just, you know, heritage / local ag. And then the other piece of this is we're calling it entrepreneurial agribusiness, because agribusiness has been around forever, but it's really kind of business startup and how to expansion in an era in the state where we need new businesses. It's the whole endow concept. We got to diversify. We need to do things. We have farmers going away. We have ranchers going away. We need to think about, you know, entrepreneurial startup and transfers and things. So one, we have, like I said, kind of a heritage local ag, and I'd like to call it sustainable ag and keeping track of the microbes in the soil, but we're calling it, but it entails all that. We're calling it heritage ag. And then we're doing craft meats. We're doing entrepreneurial agribusiness with our incubator farm that we've now started, right? Where you can start. And then the fourth piece is equine. Wyoming is number 8 nationally in terms of horses. Fremont County, where our main campus resides, it's number 1. We got a lot of horses. We got a lot of tourism, and I think there's a lot of things we can do. So those are our 4 niche areas. And it's a lot. Threading through it all is called entrepreneurship, business startup, whether it's outfitting or horse training or starting a small farm or a little bit of meats, pork, whatever it is. That's kind of our 4-legged stool.
Well, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask one real quick question. Amy, it looked like did you have your hand raised or did you have a question? Are you okay? did you have a question, Amy?
No,
Oh, okay.
thank you though.
Okay. Well, with that, if there are no more questions, I really appreciate everyone taking this hour out. Jack, it's always good to see you and see all of you guys. We can't tell you how much we appreciate your attending our speaker series, and we hope you find them informative and that they are, worth your while and time. What we do want to encourage is if anyone wants more information about the Wyoming Food Coalition or to become a member, the screen is showing right now where you can go to do that. And you can just complete a quick brief and join our group. Anybody who has any questions, please feel free to reach out either to myself, Emily, who is our Vista, or to any of our other